My name is Josh Knox, and I'm a Senior Technical Marketing Architect for Carbon Black. And today we are going to be looking at hardening policies in Carbon Black Container. So let me pull this little screen over here for us to take a look at. So reasons for why we might want to have policies that harden our Kubernetes environment. I thought it'd be nice to kind of go over a few of these real quick before we actually look at the demo. So the reasons that we want to have hardening policies is for compliance assurance. Many times organizations have compliance standards that they need to meet, and by enforcing these policies, they are able to meet these compliance requirements, and then they're able to document the fact that they have met them. And when you can enforce them through a product like Carbon Black Container, you have proof of the fact that the standard is being met. Many times in a DIY Kubernetes environment, if you're trying to use OPA Gatekeeper or some other open source tool, there may not be great reporting. And so sometimes it's hard to prove, other than the word of the DevOps guy, that this policy is actually being enforced. The next one is exploitation protection. If you make sure that you have the correct policies in place, you are shielding yourself from system exploitation, from your applications possibly being breached. So the policies, they may even try to run the exploit against the container, but if the policy is in place, the exploit may not work because the policies block whatever that exploit may be trying to do. Especially if you have things, for instance, like a read-only file system, and the exploit is trying to read to the file system, actually trying to write to the file system, then you can block that. So that would be an example of one of the ways that a good policy will help with that. System resilience, if you have good policies in place, it will help to bolster your application stability. And the other thing is that you are going to shift left. So part of this policy and part of this system resilience is that if we have the policies in place early, then it forces our developers to develop in such a way that they have to take these policies into account. That way the application is not making it all the way to production. And then we realize that some kind of bad habit, bad policy has made its way all the way up to prod, and now we have to rip it out of our application, and that may take a lot of time. Data protection with the correct policies in place, you're going to be able to protect your data, make sure that one application is not able to talk to a different one, that the boundaries are not crossed and boundaries are set. Next, it does help you to reduce your attack surface. So if your policies are in place correctly, then even if an exploit is able to be successful, they may not be able to get anywhere, or their exploit may not really gain them any real advantage. So these hardening policies are very important, and so I want to show you today how you can set them inside of Carbon Black Container. So I'm inside my organization, and we are looking at Kubernetes clusters right now. And I have two clusters. I've got a dev cluster and a prod cluster, and I've already set up a few scopes. I've set up a scope for anything. That means all of my container environments, Kubernetes. I have a namespace called Big Monolith, and it exists in my dev and my prod. And so that is an application that I have deployed. I've got the dev environment, I have the prod environment, and I've got a kube system scope. So those are just a few of the scopes that I already have set up. So now let's go to enforce. And let's click on Kate's policies. And today we're focusing on these hardening policies. So under hardening policies, I already have one here, and we'll take a look at it. And it is called base policy. We can already see that it has any scope. It has 40 violations, and there are some exceptions that I put on it. So let's look at it. We see here, when we're editing it, we have the opportunity to edit the name if we want to. Here is the scope. It's any. And so we're going to click next. We could also, if we cared or needed to, check mark either include init containers or include ephemeral containers. If you have some kind of use case in your environment where you need or don't need those, you have those checkboxes available. All right, and so over here now we're actually into the policy itself. So what I just wanted to show with this policy that I already had is that this is kind of a blanket policy that I've created for all my pods that are in my Kubernetes environments. And the first is allow privilege escalation alert. I want to alert on privilege escalation. I want to alert on having a privileged container deploy. I want to block known malware because there's never a time I want malware in my environment. And I want to block node ports. It's just a bad habit that some developers get into. They decide, oh, I don't want to mess with ingress. I'm just going to use a node port, and then that node port never gets turned off. And if someone were able to get into the environment, they would be able to access interfaces that they are not supposed to access because you've allowed the ability to create node ports in your environment. So I just have that on alert. You could block it if you want to. And so now we'll hit next. And this page is nice. We can review the violations before we ever put the policy in. And this is great. If you are on the verge of trying to block something like, see, in this case, if I said no node ports whatsoever, well, then I see there's 4 violations here. So if I were to go ahead and put that on block, then that would mean that those 4 violations would start to be blocked, and I might have some very upset people. So I may want to start with alert and then go and investigate these violations and figure out why there's a node port open. There might be a legitimate reason why they have to have a node port. And if that's the case, we have exceptions. So we see the 4 violations right here. And it looks like each of these node ports were in the system monitor deployment and we're in the poor registry deployment. This is part of my intentionally vulnerable web app that I deploy into my demo environment. So we could create exceptions for these. You can see here it says exception if we wanted to. We won't right at this moment, but we could click on this and create exceptions. And then we hit next. And we confirm the policy. We see the scope again. We see the rules. And we'll go ahead and hit save because this policy already exists. All right, well, let's practice making a policy. So the first one we're going to do is we're going to add a policy. And this is going to be in our big monolith environment. And I think we already have a scope for that. Yep, there it is. So we're gonna click this guy. So this is a policy that is specific to our big monolith scope. This will, as we come into here, we decide that really all we're worried about in here, now we had alerts on privilege escalation, but I want to put a block on privilege containers and privilege escalation in the big monolith environment because, and I click block, and then I click these to move them over. And this is because I want this application, I want to make sure that my developers are not allowing privileged containers in that particular application namespace because it faces the internet and I'm a scaredy cat. I don't want that. And we see that there are violations, that the hunger checkpoint has privilege escalation available in it. So we would need to go and investigate that, but I'm going to go ahead and put that on block because that's not supposed to be happening. I'm not going to make an exception for that. So let's click next. And then there we have it. And we're going to enable the policy, and they'll probably come to me and complain. Next one is one that I really like. So we're going to add another policy, and we're going to name this one Kube System. So the Kube System is kind of a special namespace because it has your Kubernetes components in it. And I already have a scope for it as well. But also there are some things that we know about it that make it easy for us to put a few policies on it. So first of all, I want to put in here that I do not want any new resources to be deployed into this environment. That's the big one that I want to put on this one. So right here we have this deny new resources, and I'm going to hit block because no one should be putting new resources in the kube system environment once it's been deployed as a cluster. And so that is a big one. So and then the next one would be, I want to also, even though I have that, I'm going to go ahead and also block the privilege containers in here, and we'll stick with that one. So allow privilege container and deny new resources. So we hit next. Now, in this case, you may say, well, Knox, we can't do that. Inside the kube system, there are processes that have to be run with privilege to be able to run your Kubernetes environment, and you are correct. So now I'm going to show you we have violations. So we're going to go over here and we're going to see that weave is two of the violations are weave, and it's because it's the weave in the dev and the weave in the prod. And weave is our network tool that we're using inside of Kubernetes. So yes, we need to make an exception for that. So let's click on that. And here it is, and it says resource name is equal to weavenet. Yep, that's what we want. We're going to hit add. Now we've added an exception for weave. Now that's the kube proxy. Well, the kube proxy also needs to have privilege. So we're going to click exception on kube proxy, and we're going to hit add. And now we don't have any violations anymore in our kube system namespace for allowing a privileged container. And of course, we haven't tried to deploy any new resources. So now we're going to confirm everything again. Here's our kube system. And we are allowing privileged containers. No, we are not. We're blocking that. We do have exceptions, and we're denying new resources, and we enable policy. And now we have created a nice policy that allows us to block especially new resources in kube system. All right, well, I think that about wraps it up. As you can see, the policies, the hardening policies in Carbon Black Container are very powerful, and when combined with the scoping, which we've covered in another video already, if you need to find out about that, once you create your scopes and then you create your policies, you are able to, in a very controlled and organized way, make sure that you are enforcing the rules in your environment the way that you want to. Thanks for watching.